Imagine this. It's World War II, deep in enemy territory. You're a German fighter pilot, lining up a shot on a massive American B-17 bomber. You pull the trigger and your cannons roar to life. Your shells hit the target, but the bomber just keeps on flying. It feels like you're throwing pebbles at a giant.
Ow.
This was a frustrating reality for many Luftwaffe pilots. The B-17s, nicknamed Flying Fortresses, were incredibly tough. They could soak up an astonishing amount of damage and still make it home. German pilots would often return to base, convinced they had shot down an enemy bomber, only to find out later that it had landed safely. So what was the secret to the B-17's resilience? And what did the Germans do to try and solve this puzzle? The answer lies in a fascinating story of reverse engineering, intelligence gathering, and a powerful little bullet, the American 50 caliber API round. Today, we're diving deep into a captured German intelligence report from 1944. This document is a goldmine of information, revealing exactly what the Germans knew about the American 50 cal and how they desperately tried to counter its effectiveness. Let's unravel this incredible piece of wartime history. The report, titled Analysis of the American 50 caliber Browning Machine Gun Ammunition, is a testament to the meticulous nature of German engineering and intelligence. They left no stone unturned. They didn't just look at the bullets. They analyzed everything: the gun, the belts, the links, and every single type of ammunition they could get their hands on. The Germans were particularly interested in the API rounds, which stands for armor-piercing incendiary. These weren't your standard bullets. They were designed to do two things, and do them exceptionally well: punch through armor and then start a fire. For the Germans, understanding this ammunition was a matter of life and death. Their fighters were being torn apart, and their prized bombers, like the Heinkel He 177, were literally exploding in midair when hit by these rounds. The report details the chemical composition of the incendiary material inside the bullet. It was a specific mixture, primarily composed of barium nitrate and finely powdered magnesium. When the bullet hit something hard like the aluminum skin of an aircraft, the impact would ignite this mixture, creating an intense white-hot flare that could instantly set fuel alight. But what really made these rounds so devastating was how the Americans used them. The B-17s weren't just firing one type of bullet. They used a specific loading pattern in their ammo belts. The typical sequence was a mix of different rounds, often something like one tracer, 1 armor-piercing, and 3 armor-piercing incendiary rounds. This meant that for every 5 shots fired from a single gun, 3 were designed to start a catastrophic fire. Now, remember, AB-17 had 13 of these 50 caliber machine guns. You can do the math. The sky would be filled with a storm of incendiary projectiles. The German report notes this loading sequence, showing that their intelligence had managed to figure out the American strategy. They understood that the Americans weren't just shooting. They were creating a systematic cone of fire designed specifically to ignite fuel tanks. The report goes into incredible detail about the construction of the API bullet itself. It had a hardened steel core for piercing armor, surrounded by a lead antimony sleeve. At the very tip, inside a small cavity, was the incendiary charge. The Germans meticulously documented the weight, dimensions, and materials of every component. This wasn't just academic curiosity. They were trying to understand the manufacturing process. By figuring out how the Americans made these bullets, they hoped to develop better defensive measures for their own aircraft, or even replicate the technology for themselves. One of the key findings was how the bullet's design ensured the incendiary compound would ignite reliably. The impact force would crush the tip, creating the friction and heat needed to set off the chemical reaction. It was a simple but brutally effective piece of engineering. A major focus of the German analysis was the effect of these rounds on aircraft fuel tanks. American bombers had self-sealing fuel tanks, which were supposed to prevent leaks and fires when hit. These tanks had layers of rubber that would swell and seal a puncture. However, the sheer intensity of the API round's fire was often too much for them to handle. The report acknowledges that a direct hit from a 50 cal API round on a fuel tank, especially one that wasn't full and had flammable vapor inside, was almost guaranteed to cause a catastrophic explosion. The Germans conducted their own tests, firing captured ammunition at mock-up wing sections and fuel tanks to see the results for themselves. The findings were grim. The incendiary effect was so powerful that it could overwhelm the self-sealing mechanism and ignite the fuel vapor. This intelligence had a direct impact on German aircraft design and tactics. They began experimenting with new types of fire suppression systems and different materials for fuel tanks. For example, they tried purging their fuel tanks with inert gas to displace the flammable oxygen, making them less likely to explode. They also worked on improving the armor around critical components, like the cockpit and engines, to give their pilots a better chance of survival. On the tactical side, Luftwaffe pilots were trained to attack the bombers from specific angles, trying to avoid the densest fields of fire from the gunners. They favored head-on attacks, which were incredibly risky, but offered a chance to take out the pilots before the bomber. S-gunners could bring all their weapons to bear. However, the Germans also had their own advanced ammunition. While they were impressed by the American 50 cal, they were simultaneously developing their own cannon rounds like the Minigizes, or mine shell. These were thin-walled, high-capacity explosive shells designed to detonate inside the bomber, tearing apart its structure with a massive blast. It was an arms race in the sky. The Americans relied on a high volume of fire with incendiary effects, while the Germans focused on powerful single-hit explosive rounds from their heavier cannons. Each side was trying to find the perfect counter to the other's technology. The German report on the 50 cal API is a fascinating snapshot of this technological duel. It shows their respect for American engineering and their desperate struggle to find a solution. In the end, despite their detailed analysis and countermeasures, the sheer number of American bombers and the effectiveness of their defensive armament proved to be a decisive factor. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun, armed with its deadly mix of armor-piercing and incendiary rounds, played a huge role in winning air superiority over Europe. It wasn't just a gun, it was a complete weapon system, from the gun itself to the carefully engineered bullets and the tactics used to deploy them. The captured German document is more than just a technical report. It's a story of respect born on the battlefield. It's a tribute to the engineers who designed these weapons and the brave airmen who used them. It shows us that in the high-stakes world of aerial combat, victory often came down to who had the better understanding of their enemy's technology. This deep dive into a single intelligence report reveals just how much was going on behind the scenes during the air war over Europe. It wasn't just about dogfights and bombing runs. It was a relentless battle of wits, engineering and innovation. The humble 50 caliber bullet, when examined through the eyes of the enemy, becomes a symbol of industrial might and tactical genius. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest details can have the biggest impact on the outcome of a war. Thanks for joining me on this journey into a fascinating piece of military history. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and let me know in the comments what other historical military tech you'd like to see uncovered. See you in the next video.